Assalamu alaikum, peace and the mercy and blessings of God be with all of you. I begin by praising our Creator and Fashioner, and I ask Him to send peace and blessings upon all of His prophets, His messengers, and all of the righteous people of all time. I say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in reference to our Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. Welcome to another episode of Community Roundup here on E-Awaz Television. I am your host for this episode, your brother Shabbir Ali. You may have seen me elsewhere on YouTube and on other television programs. Today, I have a special guest for you, visiting all the way from Pakistan. He's Dr. Shehzad Saleem, who is a research fellow at Mawrid Institute in Pakistan, and a student of the famous and great scholar Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. Dr. Shehzad Saleem has a PhD from University of Wales, following his thesis on the history of the Quran, a critical study which is published in this hefty volume. And he also has translated from Mizan of Sheikh Javed Ahmed Ghamidi this book entitled Islam, A Comprehensive Introduction. And some of what is in this book is what we're going to discuss here today. As I turn to my guest, we're going to talk about the general problem of how do Muslims live with other communities. How do we express and understand our commonalities with Jews and Christians in particular for this segment? So let me turn to our guest, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. Welcome to E-Awaz Television.
Thank you very much.
To Community Roundup, and welcome again to Canada.
It's my pleasure.
So, these with our Jewish and Christian friends, do we really have a lot in common, or is it that what we have as differences should divide us?
So, first of all, of course, as human beings, the biggest commonality, of course, is that we belong to the same genre of species. We are human beings, and I think that is one commonality which encompasses such a huge sphere. But other than that, I think the biggest commonality which unites us is the creed of monotheism. So as these Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are concerned, the biggest thing is that they all believe in one God. And there could be deviations, there could be something which of course is against monotheism, but the stated and the accepted stance of all these three religions is that they are monotheistic. And it is a surprise to most people when I bring this up that there, of course, this is of course in the eyes of people, there is this very big question that if Christianity is a monotheistic religion, then how should we regard it to be actually so? Because they regard Jesus to be Son of God, and etc., etc. So how can, of course, this be accepted? And I often say that before I actually answer the question, that you study the Quran. In the entire corpus of the Quran, there is not a single place which calls Christians as mushriks. Of course, it calls them kafirs because kafir is a word which means a person or a group who intentionally denies the truth, but not at a single place are they called mushriks, even though they indulge in these blatant forms of shirk or polytheism. And that is because their stated objective is that they believe in one God, and to them Trinity or the Godhead of Jesus or etc. is basically a manifestation of monotheism. We don't accept that, or we would criticize that. But look what the Quran has done. It has accepted, it denies Trinity, but it gives them this honor or this status that if they are monotheists, they claim to be monotheists, they are regarded to be monotheists. So unless a person is a self-confessed mushrik or a polytheist as the polytheists of Arabia were, the Quran says that we would not regard that entity to be, or that denomination to be polytheist.
So here's a question, Dr. Saleem. A Christian may say, okay, so we believe in one God, you believe in one God, but how do we know that this is the same God that we're talking about?
Because the origin of the scriptures which originate from the you can say the progenitors of these religions is God himself, because we say that the Torah, the Quran, the Injil, all these three divine books had the same source. They all came from God. And to us, of course, when we speak of the Quran, when we study the Quran, the way the Injil and the way the Torah is mentioned, is that as if they have come from the same source. Now, as far as your question is concerned, that why would a Christian agree to that? And the simple answer to that would be that to Christians also, of course, they do believe in all the prophets of God, or the previous prophets of God. They might be having a different view regarding certain of them, but their latest stated objective, for example, of the Roman Catholic Church or the Christianity, is that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is a prophet of God, although he is a prophet for Muslims only. So now it is something which is accepted by their clergy, by the Vatican itself. So that's how I would answer that.
Yeah. Now, you've spoken a lot about our commonality with Christians in that we also believe in Jesus. If a Muslim watching this show is thinking, okay, so I have a Jewish friend or co-worker or neighbor, how am I going to explain to the Jewish friend or co-worker that we have commonalities with them? Do we, for example, believe in Moses? Do we believe in Abraham? Let's take Moses as a starter.
Absolutely. I mean, all the prophets prior to Prophet Muhammad, which of course includes a whole series of prophets starting from Adam. And you know that there are so many verses in the Quran which enumerate that the way religion was given to Adam and to Moses, Shara lakum min ad-dini ma wassa bihi Nuh wa ma wassayna bihi Ibrahim, which of course then enumerates the whole chain of prophets, tells us that as Muslims we are required to believe in all these prophets of God, which of course includes Jesus and Moses and the rest, and our faith is not complete unless we profess this faith. So to us, it is as simple as that we believe in all prophets of God, and they are equally honorable to us.
That's great. Let's turn to our Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Often we hear that he is the father of monotheism. So what do Muslims believe about Abraham?
So of course, Abraham is revered in the Quran, Kanat ummatan kanita, inna Ibrahim kana ummatan kanita. There's so many words in the Quran which tells us as if he is the founder of, as you rightly said, of monotheism, and he is revered by all the three faiths, especially Muslims also regard them. And it says that millata abikum Ibrahim huwa sammakumul muslimin, which is of course something which tells us that we are the progeny and the millat of Ibrahim, and it is he who has given us this name. So the status of Abraham, and not only in the Quran, if you see the way we send durood, of course the prayer to the Prophet is something which says Allahumma barik kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim, which is like saying that please send blessings the way you blessed Abraham, which of course would mean that he is on a higher pedestal or a higher plane. So I would say the way the Quran speaks of Abraham is as if he's an exceptionally great prophet.
Now, there are certain moral and ethical teachings which are in the Bible, and naturally readers of the Bible, whether Jews or Christians, may be asking, are there similar teachings in the Quran? Let's take, for example, in the Ten Commandments where it says you should honor your father and your mother, you should not kill other people, you should not commit adultery, you should not lie, cheat, or steal. Are similar teachings found in the Quran?
I think all of these Ten Commandments, you'll find them scattered within the Quran, and all of them, for example, qisas, which deals with the honor that life has, or the fact that you'll believe in one God, or the fact that you should not steal, all of them are, the way they are given the Ten Commandments as if it's one complete whole. But if you study the Quran, they are all scattered about, and in fact the Quran at times even adds upon these commandments, but all these 10 are already included in parts in a scattered form in the corpus of the Quran, and people have widely quoted them, and any person who is acquainted with the Quran can just look them up.
So seeing that we have so much in common with our Jewish and Christian neighbors, are there things that we can do together in our Canadian context to, bring these communities together and also to mobilize our common forces to battle issues which are equally facing Jews, Christians, and Muslims?
This is a very important question because living in a community which is multicultural and multi-faith, this is the biggest question which stares us. And I think that one of the areas that we really need to work upon is that we should live as integrated individuals within the society. I have seen these isolationist tendencies amongst Muslims in which they seem to cut themselves off, and they think because they have a different religion or you just cannot intermingle with them. On the contrary, I think if you study the Quran and the Hadith, you'll find out that if you live in a community, there is, of course, if there is some vulgarity involved, if there is some polytheism involved, that those are certain areas in which, of course, we will abstain no matter where we are. But other than that, socializing with them is something which starts the whole process. You go to them, you visit them on their festivals, on their occasions, you call them. And then the next step, which is of course recommended, is that you should have common scripture study sessions. And to start with, Muslims should acquaint themselves with the Bible. They should study the Bible, and although some of our scholars are not in its favor, but if you see how the Prophet himself and the way the Quran itself actually invokes the Old and the New Testaments is, unless you go and look them up, you'll find themselves as if there's something incomplete. So I think one area in which Muslims should work on, besides being social to our non-Muslim friends, is that they must read the scripture as far as they can, and probably a third step would be that if you can have those joint study sessions in which maybe a topic could be chosen, for example, marriage or adultery or whatever, and then you could have a discussion how both scriptures speak to each other, and this is one way in which you could get to know each other. And one last thing that I would like to say is that the manner in which you interact should not be in a way that you would like to dominate them or prove themselves wrong, but it should be to educate yourselves and themselves. And let this education and let the words of God speak for themselves. They have enough force. Why should we add our force to that?
Dr. Saleem, just very quickly as we wrap up this segment within our episode, it's very common in North America for us to have open house days in which a mosque open house that is, and we open the mosque for non-Muslims to visit so that they can learn something about Islam. Do you feel that there is a precedent for this in our tradition? Is this something acceptable in your view?
Absolutely. I think that although in the times of the Prophet we don't find any precedent because of course the Quran was being revealed and for a lot of other reasons as well. But today when we are talking about the scripture in a multi-faith society, this open house is something which is a very good way in which you bring people closer, in which you are able to offer them something. And at the end of the day, as I said very earlier on, that we must not forget that we are human beings first. The basic bond which brings us together, which bonds us, is the bond of humanity.
Well, I'm going to ask you to hold on that thought because as you say, we have the common human bond with other people. I'm going to try to expand this discussion into our commonalities with Canadians in general.
Right.
So far we've spoken about Jews and Christians in particular. So folks, I have to take a break for the upcoming messages, but stay with us because right after the messages, we'll be back to discuss the broad concept of Muslims having commonalities with our fellow Canadians and others, regardless of religions. What are those commonalities and how can we benefit from knowing those commonalities and how can we share with our Canadian neighbors and others the fact that we have these commonalities and how can we cooperate with them and they with us in battling common issues and problems that Muslims and others face. So, thank you for watching EOA's TV and the Community Roundup. Right after the messages, we'll be back with more. I'm Shabbir Ali. Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you all. Thank you for tuning in and coming back to EOA's TV with Community Roundup. I am your host for this episode, Shabbir Ali. And I have with me our guest visiting from Pakistan, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. I'll turn to him so that we can discuss our next topic. Dr. Shehzad, we broke off when we were just at the point of thinking about our commonalities with other human beings. So far we've focused on Jews and Christians in particular, but of course we have this common human element with all of the children of Adam. So what do you see as the common elements that Muslims should emphasize that we hold with our Canadian fellow citizens in general?
So, as I just started off, that the basic bond which brings us together is the bond of humanity, and whether we are Canadians or whether we are Americans for that matter, whatever be our nationalities, the fact that all of us belong to the same species, we are all human beings, and this is a huge commonality, and I think that is something which should always be the foremost whenever we are doing something. And look how far it goes. You see, if you're a human being, you feel for other human beings. If you're a human being, you have that touch of compassion for your fellow human beings. And if you feel other people to be equal to you, you always think that you can lend a shoulder to them, you can talk to them, you can discuss their problems, and you can even try to solve them. So this human plane is a vast plane, and precisely because of this, that today if there are fires in Australia, or bushfires in California, or there are earthquakes all around, or there's this famine in sub-Sahara Africa. So the way we should react, not only in this global way, is that all of us are human beings, and therefore we have that common and strong bonding. And when we are talking about Canada in particular, of course, another element comes into play, and that is that we are living as citizens of a country as well. And when we are living as citizens of a country, then we have to follow the rule of law, come what may. And this tendency of Muslims I have seen is that at times they think that if they have a different view of the Sharia, or the Sharia says something to them, just to quote an example of polygamy, for example, that they would think that if polygamy is forbidden in a certain area or in a certain country, because the Sharia allows them to marry more than one, they would say that is perfectly okay. So I would say that I would not go along with this, and I would say that to be allowed something is one thing, and to make it mandatory is another thing. So if you're living in a country which has a particular law, then that rule of law is to be held above everything, come what may. And if you in your own view think that is something which is infringing your private law or your own religion, then either you migrate from that country without breaking that law, or you follow that law. I mean, breaking the law or contravening anything of this sort is simply which is not understood. And when I talk about the law, it's not just religious law, it is all the laws. For example, traffic laws, for example, tax laws, for example, all laws that we need to follow as citizens. And one of the biggest laws is to protect the country that you're living in. So you just cannot be a person who has an agenda of backstabbing a country, and while it is, at the same time you on oath testify that you are a person who is not going to do that. So for Canadians, I would say, as Canadians, whether you're Muslims or Jews or Christians, you are also citizens of a state in which the rule of law must be followed, come what may.
Some Muslims, especially around election time, will say, hey, Muslims, you can't go out and vote because you'll be voting for somebody who will be part of a system which they will use a negative term to describe. They'll say, this is the kuffar system, so we can't be part of that. Do you think that Muslims, as citizens of a new country, have a responsibility to vote, even if they're not citizens, but they're residents and they have the right to vote?
You see, this voting process gives you a representation for your own self as well. Look at London. They have a Muslim mayor. How did he happen to be a Muslim mayor? Because he was able to take part in that whole political process, and he reached that ultimate place. So very similarly, if you would like to have your own say in a political system, then you can only do that by participating in that system. There is nothing in the Quran which forbids Muslims living in a place, in a democratic place where they can participate. I mean, we are not living in a monarchy or a place which coerces us to follow a certain ideology. We are living in a free country in which we can have our own say if we have our own representatives in that democratic process. So why not? Absolutely, I'm absolutely in favor of that.
Now, you mentioned the possibility of migrating away from a country in which you're not free to practice your religion. Do you believe that in today's context that people are denied the freedom to practice their religion?
Well, absolutely. I think there is not a single area where it is happening. I was just speaking hypothetically that if ever they think that there is something which clashes, I gave this example of polygamy, for example, or maybe even cousin marriages. For example, a Muslim could say that, like, marry my cousin, and under the law it's not allowed. Or a Muslim could say that I want to take another wife, and under the law it's not allowed. So that, as I said, that law is permissible. It talks about permissibility. It does not say that you have to marry your cousin. You have to marry a second wife. So you see, if a person feels that he has to take a second wife, then instead of hoodwinking the law, which we do, I know personally people who hoodwink the law, make fun of it, bypass the law. That is not the right way. You either face it the way it is, or if you want to have your own way, then please.
Yeah, I'm trying to tease out your thoughts a little bit more on this question of migration, because you know what happens here, Dr. Saleem? Some Muslims come to Canada, they live and they have in their minds that they're going to work a little bit, earn some money, go back to their home country. And so while they're here, they're not thinking of setting up roots here. They're not thinking of being part of the process,
Right.
because their minds are always that they'll go back home. And sometimes they do take their children, uproot them from the society in which they were born and they grew up, and they try to resume life in another country, now with their children, feeling out of place in that new country. And eventually they realize it's not working, and they do come back to Canada. So what advice do you have for Muslims living in this part of the world in view of this situation which I've just described?
Well, actually, if you're talking about Muslims who are Canadian natives, Canadian citizens, and they are pushed out of the country and then they have to come back. You see, this is something of a catch-22 sort of a situation. This is the trial and test of life that all of us pass through. And I think if you are not violating the law, if you're not hoodwinking the law, bypassing it, every person has a different scenario. And I could give maybe a more pinpointed advice from case-to-case basis. But in general, what I would say is that the trials and tribulations of life in which you take up a job in a different country, you are not able to settle there, and then you have to come back and integrate once again. So these are things that all of us know are going to happen. So it's like being a well-calculated person who knows what is going to be outcome. So you always leave that margin in which there could be a failure of not thinking what actually you imagine would happen. So I think this would happen in any case, in other cases as well. So leaving the fact that you plan, as you said, man proposes and God disposes. So at times that disposal is not to your own advantage, but then this is how life is, and you have to plan accordingly.
Yeah, so I want to ask you something along the same lines. Do you think that Muslims can wholeheartedly decide to live in a place like Canada while still being Muslim? Or is there a kind of a conflict in one's mind that, okay, I'm leaving, let's say, a Muslim country and I'm coming here to Canada, and this is somehow like a violation of something integral to me? Is a Muslim, by deciding to take up residence and citizenship in Canada, violating something that is inherent to being a Muslim?
I don't think so, because if there is something, then people who are its proponents should take it up and point it out. There are people who say that the tradition is that there is Darul Harab and Darul Islam, or Darul Kufr and Darul Islam, and living in Darul Kufr is something should be only out of compulsion. As I said, that division of Darul Kufr and Darul Islam was related to the prophets of God, in which there was actually this bifurcation, in which, because God had to take to task the disbelievers on behalf, and on his behalf this was done by the prophets or their companions, that was a division which was specific to the messengers of God. As far as today is concerned, we are citizens of the globe. As far as our own experience is concerned, we can settle anywhere. Of course, the fact that there are things which relate to our financial issues and obligations, if they are taken care of, there is nothing in religion which prohibits us to settle in a non-Muslim country.
Coming back more to the focus of our present discussion about the commonalities that we have with our fellow Canadians, regardless of religion, I'm reminded of a story. I met someone who was studying to be a medical doctor, and now he's a medical doctor. He was studying in the United Kingdom, and he came from a predominantly Muslim society. And when we spoke, he said to me, you know, Brother Shabbir, when I was in my country, though that's a Muslim country, I didn't understand Islam. More like I didn't see Islam in practice. But when I came to the UK, he said, that's when I saw Islam. But what he meant was that the behavior of the people in the UK that he associated with was more Muslim, even though the persons were not Muslim, than the behavior of his fellow Muslims that he knew from back in his country. Is it possible that we may find that Canadians in particular, as we're discussing here in Canada, that Canadians are more Muslim than some Muslims?
Well, first of all, as I said, we need to realize that as far as religion is concerned, all prophets of God brought Islam. So don't forget that Canadians, or a vast majority of them, are the ummah of the Prophet Jesus. And about Jesus and his followers, remember what has been said in the Quran, وَجَعَلْنَا فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُ رَأْفَةً وَرَحْمَةً, which means that followers of Jesus, we placed in them a lot of compassion and mercy. So I would say that perhaps this is not a right analogy that they are more Muslim. I would say that they're already Muslims, because being followers of Jesus, and Jesus himself brought Islam, as the Quran says, so therefore they are adhering to Islam, not because they have stolen Islam from us, but because they already have Islam with them, and it was Prophet Jesus who actually inculcated that Islam to them. So I would, of course, represent it in a different way.
Yeah, so this has been a fascinating and very excellent discussion. Dr. Saleem, thank you for sharing all these important thoughts with us. But while you're still here in Canada, we'd like to get more from you, pick your brains a little bit more. So in future episodes, I'd like to talk to you on e-Awaz television about and here on Community Roundup about the problems that people face in marriages and how to have a blissful marriage, and also the difficulties that parents and children have with each other as we try to live our Islam in a very new context in Canadian society. So do bear with us in these discussions. And folks, thank you all for watching Community Roundup here on e-Awaz television. But look for future episodes wherever you normally watch e-Awaz television and Community Roundup, because before long we will be back with another episode dealing first and foremost with how to have marital bliss and the problems of divorce and questions arising from that, and also how to have a good relations between parents and children as Muslims living in Canadian society. So, thank you again for watching. Assalamu alaikum. I'm your brother, Shabbir Ali.